Chapter 14 Around the Campfire It was difficult to hear anything above the racket Derek and Mandelbrot made moving through the woods. Derek quickly realized that there was no hope he'd be able to survive by hunting for food. He'd starve first. They'd seen very little wildlife except during their rest periods. Otherwise, whatever animals lived here simply fled from the clamor of their passage. Shapes skittered through the trees ahead of them. Birds took to the air with shrill cries. But a new sound intruded, making Derek cock his head quizzically. "Did you hear that, Mandelbrot?" Derek had stopped, leaning on the walking stick he'd cut from a dead branch and breathing heavily. They were struggling up a slope tangled with dense, close underbrush and tenacious, sticky-leaved vines. The place seemed to have been designed to give them trouble. The sun was already behind the hill and dropping rapidly, and Derek's legs itched wherever the plants had scraped skin through his clothing. Mandelbrot ahead of him, and sounding in dire need of an overhaul, was moving very slowly with his malfunctioning leg. The robot stopped and turned his head around, the neck grating metallically. "I've heard several things, Master Derek. Which sound were you referring to?" "The howling. There! You hear that?" Very faintly a mournful wail greeted the dusk. Another voice joined the first, then several others. The mournful chorus continued for several seconds, then went back to the solo voice once more. The forest seemed suddenly very dim and dangerous. Derek shivered involuntarily. "That sends cold chills down my back," he said. "There are thermal blankets in the pack," Mandelbrot told Derek. "Let me get one for you." Derek smiled. "It's not that kind of chill. It sounds like recordings I've heard of wolves, made before they became extinct." The barking howls began again, echoing and vibrating among the slopes. Mandelbrot's neck joint screeched again as the robot looked upslope. "The voices are complex," he said. "In some ways it reminds me of Wulruf's language." Mention of the cannonoid alien's name made Derek nod. He missed Wulruf, missed her quick wit and odd temper. "I wish it were, believe me. At least then we might get out of this mess. We have to find a place to camp for the night, Mandelbrot. Any level and halfway open space will do. I don't want to get caught out here in the open during the dark." "My databanks say that even in the days before Earth was settled, most wild animals were afraid of humans. They rarely attacked anyone without provocation." "Well, I'm not going to count on them having been fed the same data. Let's keep going, Mandelbrot. Maybe at the top of this hill. Though, from the size of it, I'm beginning to think we should promote it to mountain." It took them another hour to struggle to the summit. There the trees thinned out and finally disappeared on a wind-swept rocky ledge that, looming above the surrounding hills, gave them an excellent vantage point. Every last muscle in Derek's body ached from the exertion of the climb. His broken arm throbbed and burned. He was breathing in quick gasps, afraid to breathe any deeper because of his ribs. Derek swung his pack down with a grimace and found the medical supplies. An end pain injection allowed him to keep moving. Mandelbrot, every joint rasping, helped Derek inflate the tent and arrange their pitifully few supplies. Derek started a small fire in a circle of rocks, and they sat on the hilltop watching the stars appear in the dark blue of the zenith, sprinkled across the sky in their millions. "They certainly are persistent, those wolves or whatever they are." The howls had continued to serenade them as they made camp. They seemed to be coming from the west, in the same general direction they were heading, through several hills over. Derek sat on the edge of the ledge and tossed pebbles into the trees below, listening to them crash through the branches. He looked at the shadowy landscape ahead of them and grimaced. "Look at that. You'd figure the hills would have to run north to south. We're going to walk 5 kilometers up and down for every one due west." Derek glanced over at the robot standing alongside him. It didn't seem to have heard. Mandelbrot? I'm sorry, Master Derek. I was listening to them. Just make sure they don't get any closer. Derek threw another stone, then squinted toward the west. How well are you seeing, Mandelbrot? My night vision is very poor due to the crash damage. It is no better than yours. Uh-huh. Take a look anyway and tell me if that isn't a glow in the northwest. Maybe 4 or 5 of those hills over? I didn't notice before, but with the darkness. Mandelbrot peered in the direction Derek was pointing. I see a patch of light reflected from underneath clouds. Then for a moment they were both silent, listening to a voice that whispered in both their heads. All units. Central computer under attack. All units. The voice was very faint. It faded even as Derek tried to get the voice to respond. My fa... Derek began, then stopped himself. He hated the man too much to call him that, and on Aurora it meant very little anyway. Mandelbrot, it must be Avery. It is possible. It's more than possible. It explains everything. The distress call, the central computer not responding to the chem vets, our crash landing, everything. You could have used a key, jumped to the compass tower here, and started disrupting the city. Why? Mandelbrot asked. The first robot city was his creation. He was also very disturbed that I could control it. Maybe he's decided to destroy all the others. It is possible, I suppose, Mandelbrot admitted, but we will not know until we arrive. We have to push harder, Mandelbrot. The city's in trouble. Why should that concern you so much, Master Derek? The question sounded like one Ariel might have asked, and the reminder hurt more than his physical pain. Derek scowled. It just does. Maybe it's the chemfets. Some chemical bonding with the city that's due to them. I don't know, Mandelbrot. All I can tell you is that I hurt when the city hurts, and it makes me want to do something about it. Can you understand that? I can, Master Derek. What you describe sounds very similar to the compulsion of the 3 laws within every robot. And if we must push ourselves tomorrow, I would suggest that you rest, the robot said gently. You are exhausted and I cannot carry you. Derek wanted to argue, but Mandelbrot was right. He could feel the weariness, and the effort it took to get to his feet convinced him. Then I'm gonna try to sleep. What about you? I do not know how much longer I'll be able to walk. The less I move, the better. I will stand here and watch. Have a good sleep. His dreams were haunted by his father. He could take on the shape of a wolf. Ariel was there, but Wolf Avery chased her away, and though Derek tried to run after her, his feet were leaden and horribly slow. Derek woke with a start. For a moment he was disorientated and nearly panicked until the nagging pain in his arm and rib reminded him. He opened the tent and poked his head out through the flaps. It was still dark. The 2 moons were in the sky, one high, the larger one low to the west. Backlit against the moonlight he could see Mandelbrot, standing motionless at the edge of the overlook and staring out into the night. He could hear the wolf creatures baying at the moon. Mandelbrot? Everything is fine, Master Derek. I was listening to them. Their voices, it is almost like language. Their voices make me want to avoid them at all costs. They're probably discussing how tasty my bones and your metal would be. Good night, Mandelbrot. Good night, Master Derek. He lay there for a long time in the darkness, not wanting to go to sleep. He didn't know if it was because Avery would be waiting for him in his dreams, or because he was afraid Ariel would not. Chapter 15. Feint and Thrust. Silverside's creator herself might have been distressed by the robot's logic. Janet and Nazi may well have been appalled and considered Silverside's post-ironic mind to be hopelessly damaged. It is impossible to say. Surely an Auroran robot would be crippled, if not driven into outright post-ironic lockup, by the implications of this decision. But to Silverside, the 3 laws were simply the morals of the Old Mother, and her logic and her interpretations were not shaped by human standards, but by those of the kin. inclined to respond physically and aggressively to a challenge. It took the pack another day to prepare, a long day of using their found tools, such as sticks and flat stones, their few flint-shaped blades and planes. No one was exempt. Even the very old and the very young helped as far as they were able. After Silverside was satisfied with the arrangements, she sent most of the kin back to Packhome after warning them to take a circuitous long route. She sent some of the hunting kin with them for protection, not wanting to leave Packhome entirely undefended should her plan fail. Kenai and Lifecrier insisted on remaining behind with Silverside, and she chose another half-dozen of the pack to stay as well. As the sun set, they said their farewells to the rest of the kin, and watched them make their way among the trees. When they were gone, Silverside howled a long challenge to the rising moon, and turned to the others. "Now let us go find a walking stone to kill," she said. The city had changed, even in the 2 days since she had last seen it. It had encroached farther on the forest, spilling from the valley that had confined it. Worker walking stones with roaring chainsaws for arms were tearing at the trees at the leading edge of the city, farther in toward the Hill of Stars. Everything seemed to have changed. The ice-blue building to the west had been further over and shorter the last time, and the flying buttresses linking it to the building alongside had not been there at all. The cluster of geodesic domes at the base of the Hill of Stars was certainly new, and an open space lush with greenery yawned under the bright lights of a slender needle tower. It was as if the walking stones were not satisfied with their expansion. They had to tear down and rebuild even in the center of their city. The valley was awash with them. The wind stunk of metal. The void eyes in the sky above were lost in the glare. Yet the walking stone's ceaseless toil impressed Silverside, even as she growled at the sight of the naked, muddy hillsides in their path. "They rape the land like male taking female before a time," Kenai snarled. She growled in beast tongue, a sound of pure loathing. "There are always more of them, always more in their stone caves, always more of their lights and noises and smells." "They leave nothing for us," Lifecrier agreed. "Is this the way the void looks?" Silverside. "Is this the way the gods live?" "I do not know," Silverside answered. "It is possible. I feel a pull to it, Lifecrier. There is something in the smoothness, in the many tools they use, in the way they move. Perhaps it is something I once knew." "Then the gods can have it," Kenai said in irreverent kin speech. "I ate it." "Old Mother will eat the souls of kin as we rise to the void," Lifecrier chastised the former leader, using hunt tongue to emphasize his point. "She take us to the one back again, and we run in the endless forest." Silverside snapped the two of them. "Silence!" she ordered. Lifecrier immediately moved back into the pack. Kenai stared at Silverside for a moment, then dropped her muzzle. "Move forward now, quietly. We do not want to bring the hunters too quickly." The pack flowed among the trees, following Silverside. She brought them to a halt near a cleared section downwind of the walking stones, and surveyed the area. "There," Silverside whispered, pointing. "They will do." The wall of a building rose several meters away, a building under construction. A group of 3 walking stones was hauling materials to a wheeled cart alongside the wall, their backs to the forest. The workers were isolated, most of the continuing work being done in a floodlit area half a kilometer away. Their head voices were silent. "Now!" Silverside said, and leaped into the open. As one the pack followed her, sweeping across the ground like a grey wind, and then falling on the walking stones with savage growls. Silverside took one of them by the throat, shaking with all her robotic strength and feeling the hated thing die before it could sound an alarm. The others hit the remaining 2 walking stones in a rush. Central, under attack. Silverside heard the distress call cut off in mid-sentence, even as she turned to help Kenai and the others. She needed to have been concerned. As she had expected from her encounter with the other worker, the kin's strength was great enough to disable this species of walking stone. Under the floodlights across the open field, other workers were looking at them, and Silverside heard them alerting Central to the pack's presence. She grasped Kenai's shoulder. The hunters will be coming. We must go. Then we'll meet them here, Kenai said. Her eyes were bright with the death of the walking stones. No, Silverside said in empathetic hunt tongue. Kenai will destroy the pack if she does that. We've prepared for them. They will follow, I promise that. Take them. I'll follow. Kenai gave a howl of both challenge and triumph to the nearest workers and turned. The pack followed her back into the forest. Silverside waited, standing over the downed workers. Yes, they were like the Krajal. The others had turned back to their work, following the orders of Central. She heard Central call the hunters. When she saw the first gleam of their armored skin rushing toward her, she turned and followed the path of the others back into the forest. Behind her she heard the crashing as the hunters bowled their way into the undergrowth. Silverside snaked her way through the trees, making sure she stayed well ahead of them, but left a clear path behind. Even so, the walking stones remained close behind her. When she finally broke through into the glade where the others waited, they were not far behind. All the kin could hear them. Birds were rising in panic above the trees, and they could smell the oily stench. The kin stirred restlessly, muttering an angry beast talk as they milled around Silverside. She stood in the center of the glade, pacing. The open spot was situated in a deep valley, surrounded on all sides by one by steep slopes. The rest of you, into the trees. Remember that their lightning will kill you if it touches you. I will lure them in and run. Kenai, you will do the same. They were barely in position when the first of the hunters broke through the ring of trees, the others at its heels. Silverside gave a rumbling of beast talk challenge, then broke and ran when the hunters raised their hands to her. Laser fire raked the trees, just missing her, and the hunters lumbered into motion again. Follow, the voices in her head said. Do not let the creature escape this time. This was exactly what Silverside had hoped for. The hillsides formed a natural funnel. The walking stones had to move as a group. The walking stones moved across the glade as one. And, as one and intent on their pursuit of Silverside, they tumbled into the deep pit the kin had dug across the glade and hidden with dry glass. Now, Kenai! Silverside cried. The dirt removed from the pit had been piled next to it, and blocked with fallen logs. Now, Kenai cut the lashings holding the logs. They rolled crazily over the edge, followed by a roaring landslide of dirt and stones. The Kenai pushed at the mounds of dirt, howling, keeping it cascading down on the hunters as a choking cloud of dust rose. Silverside could hear the head voices wailing distress as the walking stones were covered under the weight of 2 meters of rocky clay. When the dust settled at last, there was nothing to be seen of the hunters. They were gone, buried. Even the head voices were silent. The pack howled and wailed in beast talk. They clambered over the pit, stomping on the earth that hid the walking stones and packing it down. Life Crier licked Silverside's cold muzzle. Even Kenai rubbed her flank in appreciation. We've done it, Life Crier sighed. We've killed hunters. All the kin can see the gift of the old mother now. The reminder served to temper Kenai's satisfaction. The former leader only grunted. It may seem so, but this was only one battle, Life Crier. Only half of Silverside's plan. There's still the rest. Silverside nodded in agreement, and the mood of the kin darkened again. The celebration ended as they gathered around her again. All of you must stay here to watch, she told them when they were quiet. Central may send workers to dig these hunters out, or it may have other hunters to send. Kenai, your task is harder than mine. You must watch. If other hunters come, flee, but remember that you cannot go back to Packhome until you have lost them. No matter what, you must keep them occupied for as long as you can. If workers come, you must stop them from unearthing these hunters, or if you find that the hunters can dig themselves out somehow, you must find a way to stop them or slow them down. We've not won, not yet. We've only made the first step. Silverside picked up a clod of dirt and crumpled it in her hand, letting the dust trickle back through her long clawed fingers. Now I must go and find this Central.